Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out, and the best two ways to do that is through email and then again, YouTube. And as I mentioned, I'm working on putting out there an advertisement it is, about my podcast. So as soon as I get all that ready, give you the 411 about that. All right, so I'm pretty much on all of the podcast platforms, so it won't be hard to find me. With all the introductory out the way, okay, let's get into the topic of choice here. So since it's Friday, I'm focusing on all of you. And as I mentioned last week, I'm going to go into specifics about British literature in this episode. Here we go. All right, so British lit. Oh man, what to say about that? There's a lot. I really appreciate the overall aspects of whether it comes from different genres or so forth. For the most part, and you can argue that for a lot of different elements of literature, throughout the world, and even more specifically from my home country, America, here. I don't know, it's just something very unique in the way that the explanations and where it be just translucent in the depictions or using literary elements like metaphors, similes, allegories and so forth interlaced in British literature. And I always find it quite fascinating when a country is ruled by a monarchy. Now, why do I find that interesting? It's pretty much monarchies here. You get into the nucleus of it. It's all centered around class systems for the most part. Specifically, even more so when in the initial foundation of it. And then, you transition on to the modern aspects of the extension of the monarchy, where it be in this case in Britain, the Parliament. And so getting back, it was a lot of interesting, good or bad, primarily a lot of times bad, unfortunately, centered around what the monarchy was doing to everyday people and how, everyday people were dealing with that and internalizing that. And a lot of good literary works came out of it. Specifically sayings and phrasings and all of these things. To even the point of the phrase, God save the Queen, right? So, what does this in itself mean? Now, I briefly talked about this before, but I'm going to delve in because, again, the aspects of literature and why I'm focusing in on literature. Literature is a means of expression to really dive into the conscious mind of a culture. And so, the overall term coming up with that, God save the Queen. Hey. When stuff hits the fan, hey, I throw my hands up in the air. It's all, at will. Hey, it's every woman, man for itself. And that goes a lot with the aspects of loyalty and your respect towards yourself and your government too. And so this aspects of tyranny is a real thing. And then, you trace this back to our founding fathers, our government, our our inalienable rights, our amendments, and so forth. They are surrounded about the real aspects of how to divide that and how to remedy that with the aspects of tyranny, because they experienced that with our first-hand account. And so that's something to not be taken for granted. And a lot of interesting works came from that too. When you get in the aspects of centering around the literary works of scholarly works, and you go into and thinking about cafes and people discussing ideas, but they have, again, the tyranny of the monarchy coming in and silencing, free speech or speech. And this is still implementing itself. And even now today, what, baby? Yeah, but you have to be. This is still implementing itself today, when we get into the aspects of the issues in Britain when it comes to expression and when it comes to politics, a lot of stuff. And looking towards literary works is a means of escapism to, for the most part, delve in deep into the masses to talk about, deal with, explain, and educate, sometimes here, where other means sometimes cannot. So with this said, I am going to get into specifics about British literature. Okay, so pull it right up for y'all.
Who are you talking to?
I am talking to the public here who listens to me. All right, baby girl.
And listen to me?
Listen to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now I saw a really good one. Let me pull it up. Okay. All right, so I'm focusing in on the later Middle English and early Renaissance periods. All right, so one of the most important factors in the nature and development of English literature between about 1350 and 1550 was the particular linguistic situation in England. So at the beginning of the period, which this was in Tardanise, we're going to talk about the beginning of this period here. Among the small minority of the population that could be regarded as literate, bilingualism and even translingualism were common, so far as it was considered a serious literary medium at all. English was obligated to compute on uneven terms with Latin and with the Anglo-Norman dialect of French widely used in England at the time. And, here we go with the influence of other cultures here, which specifically, when you get into Latin, Latin is be for the scholarly, be for the intellectual. There's not a whole lot of room for interpretation of art, but it is there. But works like Dante's where the excerpt of Dante's Inferno and other pieces, they played and explored what can be done in the aspects of literature, Latin, and so forth, all these things. So let's get into talking about. All right, so moreover, extreme dialect diversity with English itself, from what I'm remembering from my interpretation about that certain literature. Okay, a disadvantage not suffered by writings in Anglo-Norman and Latin. Literary culture managed to survive and, in fact, to flourish in the face of such particular crushing factors as the Black Death. We're getting in the Black Plague. And, it was just massive, terrible destruction on the aspects of human health and the aspects of. Now, before I get even more into this, I would like to know what y'all think. But there's some school of thoughts about the Black Plague and the Black Death, so forth. From, I would say, looking at from modern lenses, some people have the interpretation that it was planned, like a pandemic, you can say, where, this circles itself back around with COVID, with cleansing out the population for new and so forth. And I don't know. It's just one of those things. I think it's a really good cautionary tale about the aspects of what can happen in the most devastating circumstances of the importance of medicine and developing and coming up with solutions to remedy issues like that. All right, so let's get back into what I was talking about here. All right, so chronic external and internal military conflicts in the form of the 100 Years' War also came about in the War of the Roses. And serious social, political, and religious unrest was also involved with this as an evidence of the peasants' revolt. And so, we get into the citizens going against the monarchy, saying, speaking their minds of it, they're told in their place within this rule. All right, so, which was in 1381, and the rise of the Lauraldism, which centered around the religious teachings of John Wycliffe. All of the more remarkable then was the literary and linguistic revolution that took place in England between 1350 and 1400, and that was slowly and soberly consolidated over the sequential 150 years. So later Middle English poetry, the rival of alliterative poetry. All right, so some of the best known poetry came out of this time. So specifically, when we talk about English literary figures here. So the most puzzling episode in the development of later Middle English literature is the apparently sudden reappearance of unrhymed alliterative poetry in the mid-14th century. So debate continues to whether the group of long, serious, and sometimes learned poems written between about 1350 and the first decade of the 15th century could be regarded as an alliterative revival, or rather as the late flowering of a largely most narrative traditions stretching back to the Old English period. So the earliest examples of the phenomenon was William of Parling and Winter and Waster. Are both debatable. They are both debatable to the 1350s, but neither poem exhibits the full all of the characters of the slightly later poems central to the movements. So William of Parling considerably, it was commissioned by noblemen for the benefit of them that know no French. It is a homely paraphrase of a courtly continental romance, though the only poem in the group to take love as its central theme. So the poet's technical competence in handling the difficult syntax and diction of the alliterative style is not, however, to be compared with the winner and waster author. Shh! Stop. I'm going to send you inside if you don't know how to behave. Anyway, the literary style is not, however, to be compared with the winner and the waster author, who exhibits full mastery of the form, particularly in descriptions of setting the spectacle. This poem's topical concern with social satire links it primarily with another, less formed body of alliterative verse, of which William Langdon's Piers Plowman was the principal representation of this. So indeed, Winter and the Waster was a sense of social commitment and occasional apocalyptic gesture, which may have had served a source of inspiration for Langdon himself. So the term alliterative revival should not be taken lightly to imply a return to the principles of classic Old English versification. So the authors of the later 14th century alliterative poems neither inherited or developed their own conventions, which resemble those of the Old English traditions, and only the most general way. Alright, so I'm going to go in a little bit deeper here. So, I'm going to talk about courtly poetry. So, apart from a few late and minor reappearances in Scotland and the northwest of England, the alliterative movement was over before the first quarter of the 15th century had passed. The other major strand of the development of English poetry from roughly 1350 provided much more durability. So the civilization and redefinement of human sentiments with the respect of love already presented itself early in the 14th century by such writers as Harley Lyrics. With the writings of Harley Lyrics, it took root in English court culture during the reign of Richard II, which he reigned from 1377 to 99. So English began to displace Anglo-Norman as the language spoken at court and in aristocratic circles, and signs of royal and noble patronage for English vernacular writers became very evident. This process undoubtedly created some of the conditions in which writers of Chaucer's caliber, interest, and temperament might flourish, but they were encouraged and given direction by his genius in establishing English as literary language. Alright, so I'm going to end it here, and I'm going to give my thoughts and extend out on this. Now, why am I focusing in on poetry instead of, doing a evasive thing where, I go and talk about the books, modern authors and so forth? I think that in this period in time in English history, it really established itself to the extension of what we think about the culture of Britain. So what do I mean by this? Okay, so Henry VIII, Richard II, Elizabeth, Queen Mary, going on to Lady Diana, going on to the current monarchy of today. These are world-renowned examples of the cultural value that the English bestows or represents itself to the whole world. That sharp line of division between sophistication and class, but upheaval and, abusing power. Let's be real and honest here. And the very interesting play in between these things when it comes to expression and art form. So the way that these poems, all the way to the court, all the way to lyrical hymns, music, and so forth, they were really, to me, means of taking being at liberty to have the means to go and be serious and take a serious stance against, social commentary to the point of satire. Now, satire is really prevalent in the aspects of, I would say, modern British humor and a lot of other things that comes with entertainment and the arts, and in this case with literature. Because, it's something to be said about how the influence of people like Monty Python, people like, with that whole thing with Monty Python and the humor and the being bold and edgy and being outrageous to prove a point. And then, you get into, figures like Cumberbatch, actors like him, when he was, at his height of fame, when starting out, and then, when you get in the aspects of him and his wittiness and that he in his roles that he did in his early works, and then, when he took on the role of Sherlock Holmes and the BBC, and then, when we get into the not so, well, I would say, to each his own with the aspects of British humor, but, it's not all, there's a layer and a level to it. It's not all centered around highbrow intellect, even though, I think Cumberbatch's work is a bridge between that. But, you get in the aspects of people like the comedy duo. It's just they're phasing my mind, but I really appreciate their work, and they're so funny. When they came out with the movie Hot Fuzz, and you got Slackers, the show like that. And then all other different levels of shows. You're gonna get in trouble. Other different levels of shows that came out around that time that was making a lot of serious commentary about the aspects of plight and your disposition in the modern world and where you fit in, and in the aspects of being an adult and, merging all those things together and being disillusioned about the way that you are. Now, circle back to what I just said about this time period in poetry, specifically with all the things that were going on. And then the literary really was expressing these things in a way that being overt wouldn't quite go over so easy. Finding means to an end to, get people to think outside of themselves, to escape within themselves, and to have comfort to have that outlet of knowing that there's a way to express those things without, I guess you can say, without looking over your shoulder constantly, at that point in time. And then even on to now. So with this said, I'm ending it here, and I would greatly like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. And as I said in the beginning of the episode, the best way to do that is four ways here. It's email, and again on YouTube. All right, so tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.